And now, our panel on the current state and future of ML DataOps landscape with Alfred Chuang from Race Capital, Pavan Tripathi from Bregal Sagemount, and moderated by Andy Pavlo, Associate Professor from Carnegie Mellon and co-founder of OtterTune.
All right, guys, thanks for being here. We're excited today to have Alfred and Pavan with us. Alfred, Pavan, it's good to see you guys.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Pavan.
So let's get this started. We're here to talk about what's the state of ML DataOps. And you guys are sort of, unique position in the VC world that you kind of see everything. So I'd be curious to know if you see any patterns or observations that you're seeing in the sort of as an investor from startups or just in industry in general. And what are some opportunities or even missteps that you think companies that are coming up in this space should avoid, look into?
Andy, perhaps I'll start.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing. I think we've been waiting for almost a decade to see machine learning to be pervasive and is in every application, right? So we all expected that to happen. We'll go way beyond just having some simple recommendations from machine learning into really automation coming out of machine learning. And most of that have been kind of like used in large company with lots of resources. They've hoarded a lot of data, both structured and unstructured, and they were able to have lots of model build, train them, and make things happen. And that's all changing. I think in the last year in particular, I'm starting to see a dramatic change where the barrier to entry is much, much lowered. So the hope to be able to see in the next years to come that every single application will have a lot of automation that derive from the things they learned using machine learning, is going to happen. I mean, I've been preaching this thing called predictive computing for quite some time, where most of the transactions will be basically untouched, unmanned, and they could actually just fire on their own. We'll be starting to see applications literally on our mobile phone that we authorize once. We never have to do anything. And the rest of the operations all going to be happening on its own. Like a car will show up to pick us up, food will be delivered to our table on its own. I think we're going to see that in the next few years to come.
Pavan?
Yeah, I would echo what Alfred says around the barriers to entry. That's a super important point. And we're seeing that not just in companies that we're evaluating from an investment point of view, but in our portfolio itself. You're starting to see relatively small companies say, hey, we've been collecting data from whatever exhaust they've been collecting data from for a long time with, in some cases, no real data strategy around it, but realizing that they actually have an asset on their hands that they can do something with from an automation point of view. So you're seeing, again, relatively small growth stage companies be able to invest in AI and ML projects. And that really starts with first having a really deep understanding of what data you have, what quality it is, how usable it is, and then being able to do something with it from a software point of view. It's a really exciting time for innovation in that sense. So, and one of the things we're seeing across our portfolio is basically every company that has some sort of data asset, whether incidental or purposeful, is looking for ways to build applications with it and build automation within their existing platforms with it. And that creates a huge need for data scientists at all of our companies. And I think that need is only going to be up and to the right for the foreseeable future.
I mean, related to this, would you say there's any mistakes you're seeing from companies that maybe they're not taking, initiative with the data that they do have? Is that, this obvious thing? Or are there other things that you think are detrimental that companies are not doing with data?
Well, Andy, I mean, you have to assume at this point, all the companies are making all the mistakes imaginable, right?
Sure.
We are hoarding too much data that we're not trying to get them indexed or organized. We're not optimizing the structured data that we have. They're not using OtterTune, for example, right? And so they will have too much stuff that is hard to handle. And then combining on the unstructured side, people are not really thinking ahead of time to think, well, all those lake house type technology are emerging in the marketplace. How should we rationalize when structured and unstructured data are combining into one and we learn from, you do learning on it. So all that stuff, I think, is all new. And likelihood is we're going to regret things that we throw away, regret that we store too much stuff that we're never going to be useful with. There's no reason to. So a strategy and a plan is now urgently needed, because if we know application model is going to be dramatically changing over the next few years to come, every app is going to be different in their behavior. and the essence of how well the app will perform will not be in the usual sense relying on the user, but we're relying on the asset that we've collected along the way. So that's going to be super crucial. Those are things that I think every organization need to think about. Doesn't matter what industry you're in.
And I think the one thing I would add on to that is having a strategy, as Alfred put it, on what you're going to do with your data is super critical. And then maybe a very tactical but important technical point is making sure you actually have the rights to use that data, and especially if it's coming from your customers. At the front end, as you're thinking about scaling your business and scaling what you're going to do with that data, making sure you actually have the rights to use it so you can commercialize it later down the line is super critical and a big linchpin to being able to have a successful program on it.
Got it. Awesome. So, I mean, so things we've talked about so far, they're for obviously existing companies, right? Like if you're not a company, you don't have any data, right? Like, so if you're a company, you start collecting data and you want to do something like that. So what about companies, or what about people that are thinking about doing a new startup, want to build a new company, and they want to come talk to you guys? You guys are very, very aggressive investors, very successful. So what are some to-dos or not to-dos that they should think about when they're pitching to investors like you?
Oh, that would definitely.
What's that?
You should go first, Pavan.
I'd actually be curious to hear your point of view, Alfred. We tend to see slightly later stage companies that already have some revenue, have a product in market. So I'd love to hear what you say, and I can take it from the later stage perspective.
I'll give you some examples also. You guys are too kind. Without a doubt, I think any company, and then this is actually going to surprise you guys, is because our fund only invests in infrastructure type companies, in seed and pre-seed and some A's, so early. So almost all of them, including now the Web3 companies, are talking about, surprisingly, they also need data analytics, and machine learning. Every business does, right? How would you be able to predict and do predictive analytics and also be able to automate anything if you don't have data support? So if you want to pitch investors and you don't have an element of data in it, I think it's going to be very, very difficult, whether you're in a B2B application, anything SaaS, anything consumer. Literally, no one will talk to you. So I think having a data strategy about whatever you are trying to pitch to investor is going to be super crucial. In particular, in our case, because we're investing in a company that enable this activities to happen, right? And this generation of data-driven type of applications to emerge into the real thing. We're looking for any possible way to lower the barrier of adoption. I mean, a very good example, and to advertise a little bit, we recently invested in a company called 𝘁𝗍𝗏, and the founder came out of Cruise. Without a doubt, the autonomous car company are the most advanced in the world in actually deploying machine learning technology, because they got unmanned vehicle on the street. Literally, those are robo-taxis in San Francisco, and traversing through very difficult traffic, uncontrollable pedestrians, dangerous people, and also dangerous drivers. And they will have to learn along the way what's going on to tell the rest of the community of these autonomous cars what they are about to run into. So to be able to take those kind of very complex, long set of collecting data and complex on-premise type environment into the cloud environment and lowering the barrier to be able to adopt machine learning, you need tooling, right? So you have to be able to train your model, fork new models, combine models, test, and then put them into production. So the operations part is going to be extremely crucial. That's where most things get stuck. Most machine learning model never get into production. So we have to change that now, because that's wasteful. So for me, I'm most excited to see this lower barrier, and all the company, doesn't matter what they do, they got to have a data plan.
Actually, what does that data plan look like to you? Is it say, I'm going to use Amazon or Google, or is it something more lower level?
Well, it has to be more comprehensive to be able to explain, this is my unstructured data, this is my structured data. How am I optimizing both of them so they don't have an Amazon, S3 tab that's going to be running out of control? No investor like to fund that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have rationality. And the other thing is your whole environment, just like how we do development in the past, right? So you'll be able to explain the entire stack from top to bottom, what are all the tooling you're using to build these applications. Now you got to be able to explain what are the toolings I'm using to build machine learning and how automated you are as well. Otherwise, You just know when you're going to run into and how expensive this is going to cost, and the money you raise, how effective it's going to be deployed.
Mm-hmm.
On that point, as we take the perspective from slightly later stage companies that have a product in market, have achieved some strong level of product market fit, one of the things we do see is as a traditional B2B enterprise software company, as we talked about earlier, I have a lot of data and I'm going to monetize it, and I'm going to be an AI ML company, and as a result, I want you as an investor to value me like an AI ML company. But oftentimes you see that it is more pie in the sky or more of a aspirational goal as opposed to something that's concrete. So along with the data ops part that Alfred is talking about, having a concrete business plan around what you're going to do with that data and how that actually translates into revenue in the relatively short term and hopefully over the long term, that creates client value. That's critical to getting the valuation I think that people are looking for, and getting the money they're looking for is having that more baked out. Oftentimes we see, that the growth strategy slide that has it on there, but then to Alfred's point, when you dig a little bit deeper in terms of, okay, so what does that actually mean? What data do you have? What's structured? What's unstructured today? What resources have you put against it? And how do you actually monetize it? That part's really on the come. And so coming to an investor with that fully baked, or at least partially baked, so you can underwrite that revenue stream, is incredibly important to getting the value that you want.
I mean, this is all very insightful. I think you say something obvious, like obviously don't talk to an investor without wearing like pants or something, freaking wear your shirt that day. All right, very cool. So given that, the ML data ops space is pretty crowded right now, there's always, yes, they were in a sort of economic downturn, but, up until last year, there's been a lot of announcements of, a lot of companies raising a lot of money. So what do you think is a good way for companies to be able to differentiate themselves from what is, for all intents and purposes, a crowded space? And Pavan, I can let you go first on this one.
Yeah. So I agree. It's a complicated, crowded, and sometimes confusing landscape. But I look at this market as maybe 5 to 10 years behind where the DevOps tooling market was, or when we think about the infrastructure tools. And in that market, you've obviously seen traditional players evolve and become consolidators, and continue to gain market share. You've seen startups who have grown pretty tremendously and taken share. And when you look at that class of company, who has actually been able to disrupt the incumbents and how they've been able to do it, they've typically been able to do it in specific niches, as in having very specific targets and goals and a very specific part of the value chain they're going after.
Can you give an example?
So maybe looking at like the DevOps space, visual testing is a great example. There's a lot of test automation companies out there, but in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, you've seen the rise of some pretty incredible visual testing companies that have been able to get very deep in that space, and eventually they become either strategic targets. I don't think we've seen anything that's gotten to IPO escape velocity yet, but I think one day we will. But they become strategic targets because they've gotten very deep in the space and very deep in a very narrow niche of the test automation ecosystem. I think the same thing is true for the ML AI data ops ecosystem. If you look at those market maps, there's 25 boxes on it, and some folks are overlapping. And the winners are going to be the ones that dominate a space, at least in the beginning, until the platforms end up consolidating the space.
Mm-hmm. Alfred?
And I think we are still so early in deployment. We may be, a few years into the development, and both on the data side and also from the machine learning side. But on a deployment perspective, it's not impactful enough to us yet, right? Because most of the things are only barely used for recommendation. They're not used for driving decision making. So I tell you what, the spaces I'm really excited about, confidential computing, I'm very excited about, because there's so much barrier to be able to use data to complete our learning, to complete our model. So if every corner you turn, whether you're inside a bank, you say, well, I'm going to develop a new model for detecting fraud. You got to run into so many departmental type barrier that you can't get into. You got to find a way where the data can be put in a place like in a vault, where the learning can actually continue to be performed, right? Mm-hmm. This is so early, right? But that's going to be a crucial thing. So we can't let these kind of things stop us from being able to have a model trained, working, enhanced, merged. those are the things that I think will be super exciting in the next years to come, because they have to come down. I mean, like in healthcare in particular, right? So how could we, by now, gone through 3 years into COVID, and a new patient check in, the doctor cannot run a simple application and say, tell me this, the person in the same age group, same ethnicity, same underlying condition, and the current condition doesn't come back with a recommendation. What are the things that work? This is almost like, like unbearably dumb. If mankind, with all this technology, and with that many smart people, we haven't been able to help patients to get through the most urgent thing in the world, right?
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's say I made a successful pitch to Alfred and got some funding, or I'm going to make some later funding with Pavan. How do you think about your companies? What advice you give them to sort of build teams? Like, what do they need to have? What do you want to see in the team they build out on the ML side, the DataOps side, to set them up so that they are successful?
Yeah, I would maybe approach that in a couple different ways. One, obviously, you need a core data team. Every software company at this point needs it. So having people who have deep experience in that space, kind of an obvious statement, but deep experience in actually operationalizing data models and getting them into production is incredibly important. But it's also a space you're going to have to invest ahead of the curve, and that can look like a lot of different ways. Data scientists and ML folks, as everybody listening to this probably realizes, are scarce and hard to find. And so the most successful companies we've seen in terms of being able to scale those operations and doing it in a relatively cost-efficient fashion are training folks. And what I mean by training folks is taking their software engineers and making sure they understand the AI, ML, and data operation side of the world, so that they can supplement the data scientists they're able to recruit with internal folks. And having that meld between experts and people who are experts at your software and putting them together, that's where I think you get to a place that's a scalable dream team to be able to operationalize and monetize a lot of these AI ML projects.
Mm-hmm. Andy, I think this is one thing I will advise all of our companies. The most important thing is to understand what is the challenge the customer has. Right. So when you build organization, you're trying to build one to build a successful product and be able to support them and implement them on behalf of the customer. So one popular title that now we're seeing very pervasive everywhere in large banks and insurance company, in biosciences, is they always will now have a chief data officer or head of data in those companies now, everywhere you go. So those are the groups where the data scientists, and the old days analysts are all reporting into, or getting directions from. So in many ways, it's so crucial when you're building a company to cater to them, right? So ultimately, that's what we do, is you have the similar or a mirrored representative on your end. So I'm not saying, when you have a 4-person startup, now you have to go hire a head of data. That may not be possible, but then your head of engineering or your head of products would now have to take on that role. So having that carry around, be able to explain to the customers in an organization that we now understand what the customer needs, and we have a person for them to contact who they can relate to, super critical. So if you don't have data people and you try to sell a data-driven product, you're just not going to be successful, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Alfred, I'd be curious on that topic, how you think about advising your companies to go find those data people. We struggle with it across our portfolio as well. How do you guys go about approaching that challenge?
Well, it's actually amazingly, you would think, because we only are barely having a degree of data scientists out of university. It's brand new, right? I mean, it's maybe first year or second year in that the largest, most, the biggest universities started to do that. Nobody else has it. So I think we will not be realistic. We say we want someone to have 10 years data science experience. That's just kind of like, it's not going to be around. So you have to find it within. People will transform themselves into it, right? So whether it's someone that has an engineering background or somebody who have a strong analytical background, that's something they have to go into, because we're starting to see a lot of low-code tools on one end. We also have very sophisticated people that they are getting interested in machine learning. So I think we will have to be doing some self-training from that perspective to find those kind of people. And in organization would be the easiest place to go find them, I believe.
So I like the pitch here. Carnegie Mellon University, we have a master's in data science program. A lot of the employees we have at OtterTune came out of that program, including one of our co-founders. Carnegie Mellon also has a undergraduate degree in computer science, specifically for artificial intelligence. So you can hire our students; they're phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So I'd just like to thank Alfred and Pavan spending 20 minutes with us talking about the state of the, from a VC perspective, the state of the AI, ML, DataOps landscape. Really appreciate you guys spending time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great to see you guys.